The literal location of the tablets, the 10 Commandments, reflects where God wants them to be in us. Grace and peace, everybody. Welcome to Sabbath School Study Group. We're wrapping up this 5-part series, looking at the foundation of God's government, which is his law. That raised tide is where he wants us to dwell. And we can see where God wants his commandments, where he wants his laws to be in us by virtue of where he literally stores the 10 Commandment Tablets that he gave to us. But before we go there, I want to again thank you for watching. We hope you watched all 5 parts of this series. If you haven't, make sure you do that already. And subscribe to the channel so we can stay in touch. We appreciate you liking the video so others can find it and pass this on. Click that share button. It takes like 2 seconds, but makes a world of difference. And then lastly, visit us online at changeministry.org. We'd love to be able to connect with you. But until then, let's get to the study. The location of the 10 Commandments. The location of the 10 Commandments, first of all, we have to establish the fact historically that there were 10 commandments, not just the principles, but there were literal tablets or tables that God made. Exodus chapter 31 that we see he gave unto Moses when he had made an end of communing with him upon Mount Sinai, 2 tables or tablets of testimony, tables of stone, written with the finger of God. Now, this is where we get God actually writing who he is in word form for us to understand. This was not going to be left to an oral tradition because God knew we would forget, and he knew that he wanted to be known. So he took the message and he wrote it in tables of stone. That shows us that they're unchangeable, they're immutable, and they are designed to be outside of time, but inside of us. He tells us where he wants them to be because in Exodus chapter 25, verse 16, he says, "And thou shalt put into the ark the testimony which I shall give thee." The tablets that God gave to Moses, and we know that there had to be a reprint, it had to be a recopy because when Moses came down, when he received the first ones, in his frustration, he threw them down and they were destroyed. So God made a second copy. And in this copy, he says, I want you to store them. Now, remember from our study of the sanctuary, that's in the most holy place. And the most holy place is the most holy place in all of the universe. The literal temple in heaven is where Jesus and the Father operate and dwell, and Jesus intercedes on our behalf. God intended for the tablets to be in the ark to show the significance, the centrality that they were to have to Israel. But it didn't stop there. So it's so interesting that when we get to Revelation and when we see what John sees, it helps us to see where God intends his word to be in us. Because in Revelation chapter 11, verse 19, and the temple of God was opened in heaven, and there was seen in his temple the ark of his testament. And there were lightnings and voices and thunderings and an earthquake and great hail. When John sees the holy place, then beyond that, the most holy place, God's law in the very place that we now know is the most holy place on earth. When we think about who we are as human beings, the most sacred space, the most sacred place, it's not hard to figure out where it is. If you want to know where that is, ask yourself where God wants to go. And if you're not sure even of that, ask yourself what the devil wants, where he wants to go. It's here in the mind. It's here in the heart. It's here at the very center of our being that God wants his law to dwell. Because if the law of God is in our hearts, it will be in our hands. It will be the extension of what we do because it's who we are. That's why as we look at this series and as we wrap this up, that we recognize God does not want us to forget any of his commandments. In particular, he tells us, remember the 4th commandment, but he wants us to operate on this principle of living out who he is in the earth. Jesus made it all very simple when he says that, well, the whole of the law is this, basically, is to love God with all your heart, and it is to love one another as you love yourself. This is the whole law. This is the sum of it. But it's not just enough to know the sum of it, it's to know where God wants it to be. And this is where we invite him in and say, Lord, I need you to change my heart, dwell in my heart, so that what I do is because of who I am. Not only does it keep us from hypocrisy, but it's actually the evidence of him making us holy. We know he can remake us because we already looked at that. He's the one who made us in the first place. If it's our desire to live life like this, invite him into your heart today. Ask God into your heart and invite him now to write his words on your heart so that they become the habit. They become the holiness. They become the hand or the life in you and I today.